In front of everyone, my mother-in-law slapped my husband and ordered him to take me upstairs to make a baby. This happened because, even after 5 years of marriage, he apologized to his true love every time we were together and then forced me to take birth control pills. Reluctantly, Sebastio got out of the shower, took off his robe, and waited for me in bed. "Laura, you must be delighted now, right?" he said with a sarcastic smile. I didn't respond. Instead, I handed him the divorce papers. "Sign this, and you'll be able to book hotel rooms with Valeria openly and without secrets," I explained, irritated. "I always treated her like a sister. Don't twist things to make them seem dirty." He gave me a bitter smile. "Sebastio, do you really think I don't know what you've been doing with your supposed sister? 5 years of marriage, and every time you dreamed beside me, you called Valeria's name. Even on our honeymoon, you left me in the middle of the night to go see her." Sebastio froze for a few seconds and then decided to stop pretending. "Yes, I love her. If it weren't for everything you did to please my mother all these years, why the hell would I have lowered myself to marry a washed-up girl from the countryside? 10 years of silent love. 5 years of marriage. I gave my heart and soul to serving the Ravier family. I worked tirelessly, honored my in-laws, and attended to Sebastio's every whim. I thought, eventually, he would feel something for me. Clearly, I was wrong. In his heart, there was only room for his first love, Valeria. To him, I was just a superficial, manipulative woman after status. What game are you playing now?" Sebastio squeezed the divorce papers. "I just brought Valeria back to visit her grandmother, and you had to make a scene in front of everyone, making my mother lose her patience. How badly do you want to have a child of mine?" He was convinced that my request for divorce was a farce, that my true goal was to have a child with him. And because of that, he refused to sign. The next morning, Sebastio posted on social media a photo of him and Valeria intertwined together on a hotel couch. In broad daylight, you could see the faint bite marks on his neck and the bruises scattered on Valeria's soft thighs. They were trophies of a night of passion. I was still stunned when my phone rang. On the other end of the line, Sebastio spoke with arrogant satisfaction. "As you wanted, Valeria and I didn't use protection. I promise you this. The heir of the Ravier family will arrive next year. But it won't be yours." Outside the notary office, I waited under the scorching sun for almost 3 hours before Sebastio finally arrived, with his arm around Valeria's waist. The first thing he said was a threat. "You asked for this divorce. So, if my family asks, you'll have to take the blame." I looked at his face, feeling that I no longer felt anything for him. "I'll talk to your mother. I'll tell her we're separating due to personality differences." "No, that won't do." Following his gaze, I saw the woman sitting comfortably at the cafe across the street. Everything made sense now. He wanted to use me to pave the way for Valeria, making things a little easier for her future. Leaning on the nearby marble pillar, I looked at him, disappointment shading my exhaustion. "Say what you want me to do." Sebastio didn't show a trace of gratitude. His eyes were still full of contempt, but his tone was restless, casual. "It's simple. Admit publicly that you were unfaithful during our marriage. Take all the blame. Convince my mother that you were with another man and even had an abortion. That's why you couldn't get pregnant all these years. Agree to leave the marriage with nothing. That's all." When he finished speaking, my hand clenched tightly at my side, my nails digging into my palm. We had been through so much as a couple. Do you really need to be so cruel? Sebastio shrugged indifferently. I have no other choice. If you don't do this, even if I divorce you, my family will never accept Valeria. People are inherently selfish, and love, or the lack of it, only makes this more evident. For Valeria's sake, he was willing to trample me. He shamelessly demanded that I pay the price for their affair. In the past, I would never have said no to Sebastio. If my unconditional trust and commitment could make him happy, I would have followed his words for life. But this time, I didn't want to give in. That morning, after everything I had already gone through, I decided I wouldn't shed another tear for Ravier. I waited for 3 hours, under the scorching sun, wondering what I would do to get out of the situation he had created. And then he arrived, with an unbearable air of superiority, and with his arm around Daniela's waist. His sister. He didn't even try to hide it anymore. Looking at me, his expression was pure condescension, as if I were to blame for the whole farce. He looked down at me, the same expression of contempt he wore every time he tried to reduce me to an insignificant woman, submissive to his family's whims. The first thing he did was threaten me, making it clear that if his family asked, I would have to take the blame for the separation. I felt a mix of disgust and indifference. That wasn't love anymore. In fact, it was just a form of control he maintained over me. A way to ensure that, if I ever decided to leave, he would still use me to protect his immaculate reputation. I took a deep breath and proposed a simple deal. I would talk to his mother, tell her we were separating due to personality differences, without going into details, without exposing the rot Ravier insisted on hiding. But he just shook his head in denial, his gaze fixed on Daniela, who watched everything with a victorious little smile. To her, I was just a removed obstacle, an insignificant figure from whom she had already taken everything, including the husband. It's simple, Marta. Admit publicly that you were unfaithful. Convince my mother that you cheated on our marriage with another man, who even caused you to have an abortion. That's why you never got pregnant by me. Take all the blame and leave the marriage with nothing, he said, with not a trace of remorse. My hands trembled, but not from fear or submission. And yes, it was a rage I never thought I would be capable of feeling. Inside, something began to break. He didn't just want to get rid of me. He wanted to destroy me, to ensure that I wouldn't even have the right to look back and remember the years of effort, dedication, and sacrifices I made for that family. Until that moment, I always thought I'd do anything to please him. I dedicated myself to his mother. I served his family with everything I had. I worked tirelessly to become someone he could love. But, in that split second, I realized how pathetic all of that sounded. Ravier never saw me as a wife, only as a disposable piece. A means to achieve his goals while sustaining his romance with Daniela. Daniela, who I always saw as a distant friend, someone I would never suspect, was there, by his side, confident that I would follow all of Ravier's orders. But, this time, it wasn't the Marta from before who was there. I looked at him with all the calm I could muster and coldly replied, "If you think you can use me like this, Ravier, you're terribly mistaken." He stared at me, confused, as if he was still facing the woman who would once accept any command without hesitation. "You always say you met me as a simple country girl, innocent and with old-fashioned values. Maybe it's time for you to realize that a simple person also has limits. And you've crossed all of mine." Ravier laughed, mocking. "You really think that by challenging me, you'll leave with any dignity? I already have everything planned, Marta. It's just a matter of time until everyone believes that you're the one responsible for our failed marriage." I held the divorce papers, ready to sign and rid myself of that nightmare. But before I could do so, I approached him, my voice low but full of conviction I didn't know I had. "The difference between us, Ravier, is that I have the courage to face the truth, while you live in a world of lies, deluded by your own arrogance. If you want Daniela by your side so badly, go ahead. But I'll make sure everyone knows who you really are, without the need for lies, and without accepting your terms." He looked at me for a moment, surprised by my firmness, but within seconds, he laughed again, dismissively. "You can try, Marta. In the end, you'll just be another discarded woman that no one will listen to." 2 weeks later, at his mother's anniversary ceremony, I knew it would be the perfect moment. I dressed with the same elegance with which I always presented myself to the Gomez family, greeted each person with a smile, and waited for Ravier and Daniela's arrival. They entered together, holding hands, both with an air of victory, thinking I would remain silent to avoid making a scene. And it was right there, the moment Ravier tried to stare at me with that superior look, that I decided there was no going back. I raised my glass and asked for a moment of attention. Everyone stopped and turned to look at me, curious. And before Ravier could interfere, I spoke. "I've always been proud to be part of this family. 4 years, I did everything to honor the Gomez name, to be a good wife to Ravier, a dedicated daughter-in-law. But today, I realized that the sacrifice I made was never appreciated. Everyone's faces turned to Ravier, who began to sweat, while Daniela squeezed his hand, uncomfortable. I tried with all my strength to build a life alongside the man I chose to love. Even knowing that his heart always belonged to someone else, I insisted, hoping one day to receive the same affection in return. I looked directly at Ravier and Daniela, who were both frozen. But now I know that the respect I've always given to this family was not reciprocated. Ravier tried to interrupt me, but I raised my hand and continued. I can only thank for finally seeing the truth. For seeing that the love Ravier said he felt was never for me. So, to everyone here, let it be clear. My role as a wife ends today. The truth he tried so hard to hide is now exposed in our reality. I looked at Daniela, who lowered her head, and at Ravier, who swallowed hard. I handed over my glass and walked away without looking back. For the first time in years, I felt that the only person who truly mattered was free from that weight. And in that moment, I promised myself that there would be no trace left of the Marta who once accepted being humiliated. I knew that Ravier and Daniela might live in the same world of appearances, but never again at my expense. It was the end of everything, and for the first time I was okay with that. As soon as I left that house for the last time, a bitter sense of freedom took over me. Ravier and Daniela thought they had won, that I would move on without making waves, like a discreet shadow in their lives. But what they didn't understand was that no one spends years being trampled and walks away unscathed, without the thirst for a just and deserved revenge. I wanted more than just the divorce. I wanted them to experience the pain, the emptiness, and the humiliation they forced me to carry for so long. In the following months, I was careful. I kept my distance, didn't seek contact, but also didn't disappear. I stayed in town, went back to places I had always avoided because of Ravier, reconnected with people I had left behind because of him, and slowly, I reconnected with old friends. This, of course, brought rumors, which surely reached him. I wasn't hiding, wasn't avoiding conversations or laughter, and I know this began to annoy him. I heard from acquaintances that he was trying to find out about my life, probably expecting me to be falling apart. But on the contrary, the more the days passed, the more I seemed to flourish. Then, one night, I ran into Daniela. It was casual, but providential. She was at a party, surrounded by people who seemed to revere her, as if she were the center of attention. She saw me from afar. The shock was evident. She hadn't expected me to be there, to be capable of occupying the same space as her without seeming intimidated. Her expression quickly shifted to a forced smile, and she approached, probably to make sure she still had control over me. "Marta," she said with a fake smile, "I didn't think you'd mix with this crowd. You seem different." I looked at her, letting her see the contempt on my face, and calmly replied, "Daniela, I think you confused who was here to mix." She laughed, perhaps to maintain her pose. But I could see the discomfort growing. I was no longer that submissive woman, ready to accept any veiled insult or passive humiliation. That was the first part of my revenge, to exist firmly in her presence, showing that the role of the abandoned and humiliated wife was not mine. When she returned to her friend's side, I saw her throw discreet glances in my direction, clearly bothered by the idea that I could be there, happy, and maybe even superior to her. But that wasn't enough. What hurt me most was thinking that Ravier was going on with his life in peace, secure in the belief that I would remain silent about the years of neglect and betrayal. It was time to change that. In the following weeks, I started feeding rumors about his behavior during the marriage, about the hidden betrayals, and the hypocrisy of his perfect life with Daniela. I knew Ravier's mother was a strict, conservative woman, and she would make sure to confront him when she found out her son had lied to the entire family. One day, I saw Ravier at the same cafe I used to frequent. He noticed me and, impulsively, came over to my table. He had that strange smile, the same air of superiority that always made me feel inferior. I sat calmly, keeping my eyes on him. Inside, a silent, resolute anger burned within me. "I see you're having a good time," he commented, with a fake look of surprise. "I am Ravier, and finally free from the farce you represented." He tried to disguise it, but I saw the discomfort on his face. "It's no use trying to provoke me, Marta. I know this is just a show to get to me," he replied, trying to stay calm. I smiled, leaning slightly toward him, and said in a low but firm tone, "You still think everything revolves around you, don't you? But now, Ravier, the show is mine, and you and Daniela will watch every scene." After that encounter, Ravier started avoiding me. He couldn't stand seeing that I was doing well, that I had rebuilt my self-esteem. I heard Daniela was also irritated. Tormented by the shadow, I left wherever I went. I lost count of how many times mutual friends came to tell me that the tension between them had become visible. A rivalry disguised as a happy marriage. It was clear that their image was crumbling, bit by bit. And slowly, Ravier and Daniela began isolating themselves, probably not knowing whom to trust, not knowing where the rumors were coming from, or how I always seemed one step ahead. Until, at a family event, Ravier's mother decided to call me over. I knew she didn't like me, but she was a traditional and stern woman who despised betrayals and the breaking of family values. I took the opportunity to tell her part of the truth, without going into great detail, but with the calm and precision I knew would convince her. She listened without interrupting me, and when I finished, I noticed something in her expression had changed. She looked at me with a respect I had never felt before. It didn't take long for things to start falling apart in Ravier and Daniela's lives. The relationship between them became tense, full of distrust and accusing looks. I knew it was only a matter of time until Daniela realized the man she was with would never be faithful to anyone but himself. And, as expected, one day I heard that Daniela had left Ravier. After a public argument, she confronted him in front of friends and family, throwing all the lies and empty promises he had made to her right in his face, just like he had done with me. For the first time, Ravier was alone, without his mother's support, without Daniela's love, and, most importantly, without my devotion. That was what he never imagined losing. My silent presence, my unconditional support, my love, that had once been real, and now was nothing but contempt. I saw him occasionally, always with a heavy expression, a lost look, and I just thought about how every choice he made led him to that ruin. Sometime later, I met someone. It wasn't planned, but it was natural. He brought back the sense of security I had lost. With him, I rediscovered what it was to be valued, listened to, and respected. And it was by his side that I truly realized how much Ravier no longer meant anything to me. One afternoon, I passed by the street. I saw Ravier, alone, staring into the void. I felt an immense peace when I realized he was nothing more than a memory. The revenge had already been completed. He was empty, and I was free.